Welcome to our discussion today. We're turning our attention to a subject that is, well, it's really part of the blueprint for the American sound of the 1970s. We're examining the history and the enduring legacy of the Eagles.
It's a massive topic.
It is. When you just look at the raw data, I mean, we're talking over 200 million records sold worldwide, 6 number 1 albums, 5 number 1 singles. It's hard to even wrap your head around their dominance. They didn't just play music. They basically defined what the world came to know as the California sound.
And what's often missed, because the songs are just so ubiquitous on the radio, is the sheer complexity of their journey.
Yeah.
We're looking at a story that stretches all the way from their formation in Los Angeles back in 1971
Right.
through a decade of, really, commercial invincibility and a very bitter breakup, a hugely profitable reunion, and activities that continue right up to the present.
The scope is just enormous.
Yeah.
I think to really understand how a band gets that successful and also that volatile, we have to look at the mechanics of it. We're going to trace the evolution of the lineup and their sound.
From those really lush country rock harmonies in the beginning to the much harder arena-filling rock of the late 70s. And we have to get into the internal dynamics, the power struggles, the creative tensions that really fueled both their success and, well, their eventual implosion.
That's really the core of it. We want to understand that transition, how they went from being a backing band for another artist to essentially a corporate entity.
So let's go right back to the beginning. 1971, Los Angeles. The story people often hear is that these guys just kind of found each other, maybe at a party or a club, but it was much more structured than that. They didn't start as a band looking for a record deal.
No, that's a crucial distinction. They started as hired employees. The catalyst for the entire project was Linda Ronstadt and her manager, John Boylan.
So she was the one putting the pieces together.
She was. In early 71, Ronstadt was a rising star in her own right, and she needed a top-tier backing band for her upcoming tour. Now, Glenn Frey and Don Henley had already met. They'd met at the Troubadour in 1970.
The famous club. They were, acquaintances, both kind of circling the same Amos Records ecosystem. Yeah. Both looking for their big break. But they weren't a unit yet.
And Ronstadt brings them together.
She recruited Glenn Frey and Don Henley specifically. Then you had Randy Meisner, who had been playing in Ricky Nelson's Stone Canyon band, and Bernie Leadon, who was a veteran of the Flying Burrito Brothers.
So these were not unknown musicians. They had real pedigrees in that whole country rock scene already.
Absolutely. They joined Ronstadt's group of performers, and they set out on her summer tour.
There's a famous story that Frey and Henley actually made the decision to start their own thing while they were still on the road with her.
That's exactly right. During that tour, Frey and Henley just realized they had a very specific chemistry, a shared ambition that went way beyond backing up another artist. They decided right then and there to form a band.
And Linda Ronstadt, what was her reaction?
Incredibly supportive. Glenn Frey later credited her with actually suggesting Bernie Leadon for their lineup. Apparently, she arranged for Levy to play with her so that Frey and Henley could approach him and see if he fit.
Wow. So she actively helped them leave her own band.
She did. It was a remarkably supportive, almost incubator-like environment. They eventually pitched the idea to Randy Meisner as well, and he was on board.
So they have the lineup. They have the blessing of Linda Ronstadt. They even played one last gig with her at Disneyland in July of 71. But then they strike out on their own, and David Geffen gets involved.
David Geffen's role here is huge. He just started his new Asylum Records label. He bought out Frey and Henley's old existing contracts, and he sent the four of them up to Aspen, Colorado.
Why Aspen?
The strategy was to get them out of the LA scene, get them away from the distractions so they could develop as a cohesive unit, as a band. They hadn't even settled on a name yet at this point.
I heard they played their first show under a pretty different name.
They did. In October 1971, at a club in Aspen called The Gallery, they performed as Teen King and the Emergencies.
Which, I think we can agree, would not have sold 200 million records.
Probably not, no.
So we have to talk about the name Eagles. There seems to be a lot of mythology around where it actually came from.
There are several conflicting accounts. It just adds to the legend, I think. One of the most popular versions of the story involves a group outing in the Mojave Desert.
Right, the peyote story.
The peyote and tequila story, yes.
Yeah.
In that version, Bernie Leadon supposedly recalled the Hopi tribe's reverence for the eagle. Don Felder, who wasn't even in the band yet, later credited Leadon with that origin story.
But that's not the only version, is it?
Not at all. J.D. Souther, who was a very close associate and a frequent co-writer for the band, He had a much simpler claim. He said that Glenn Frey just shouted out, "Eagles!" when they saw some birds flying overhead in the desert.
And then the comedian Steve Martin has his own take.
Yes, which is another interesting layer. Steve Martin was a friend of theirs from the Troubadour days. He claims in his autobiography that he suggested they call themselves the Eagles, but that Glenn Frey was very adamant about a specific stylistic choice.
And what was that choice?
Frey insisted the name was just Eagles, not the Eagles, simply Eagles.
Yeah.
It's meant to sound more like a gang tag, like a band's Cream or Traffic.
Mm-hmm.
It implied a certain kind of streamlined, tough identity.
So they have the name, they have the lineup. Frey, Henley, Leiden, Meisner. And then they're off to England in February of 1972 to record their debut album. And they're working with producer Glyn Johns.
And Glyn Johns is an absolutely central figure in this early phase. He had a very specific and very strong vision for the band. He was incredibly impressed by their harmony singing.
That was the thing that stood out to him.
It was. He wanted to shape them, really mold them, into a country rock band that was defined by those high-flying, pristine harmonies. He focused on their voices, on the blend.
And that approach paid off immediately. The first single, Take It Easy, is one of those songs that just feels like it has always existed. It was written by Glenn Frey and his neighbor at the time, Jackson Browne.
And the story behind the writing of Take It Easy is just a perfect example of how collaborative that whole Laurel Canyon scene was. Jackson Browne had written the first verse, but he was stuck on the second.
He had the opening line, right?
He had the line, "I'm standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona," but he couldn't figure out where to go with it. Glenn Frey heard it, and he immediately finished the verse with, "Such a fine sight to see. It's a girl, my lord, in a flatbed, Ford slowing down to take a look at me."
And that one contribution just unlocked the whole song.
It did. It allowed the song to be completed, and it became a top 20 hit right out of the gate. That debut album was a huge breakthrough. You had Take It Easy, you had the darker, bluesy, witchy woman, and the ballad Peaceful, Easy Feeling. They established that California sound immediately.
But then comes the second album, Desperado, released in 1973. And this is where we see the ambition really kicking in, but also the first signs of a bit of a commercial struggle. This is a concept album.
It was a huge thematic risk. They took the theme of Old West outlaws, the Doolin Dalton gang, and used it as a metaphor for modern rock stars.
So living outside the law, moving from town to town, that
Yeah,
kind of-
exactly. The glory and the isolation of it all. But during these sessions, something else was happening. The power dynamic inside the band began to shift, and shift significantly.
How so? What was the shift?
Well, initially, the assumption might have been that Bernie Leiden and Randy Meisner, being the more veteran musicians with previous band experience, would have more influence. But on Desperado, Henley and Frey started co-writing, and co-writing heavily.
Right.
They co-wrote 8 of the 11 songs on the album, including Tequila Sunrise and the title track Desperado. They effectively seized leadership of the band's creative direction.
And commercially, the album didn't do as well as the debut, did it?
No, it was considered a bit of a slump, at least relatively speaking. Desperado only peaked at number 41 on the U.S. Billboard 200. It was much less successful than the first record. But creatively, it was a major step. It really solidified that Henley-Frey songwriting partnership that would come to dominate the band's entire future.
That brings us to 1974. The band decides they need to, well, toughen up their sound a little. They want to move away from that pure country rock label and get a harder edge. This leads to the recording of On the Border.
This was a really pivotal moment for them. They started the record with Glyn Johns again, but Johns, he tended to emphasize the lush, softer side of their music. Henley and Frey wanted to rock harder.
So there was a creative clash.
A definite clash. After they only completed 2 usable songs with him, they made a huge decision. They switched producers to Bill Semsike, who is known for a much harder, more rock-oriented sound.
And this desire for a hearty sound leads directly to a change in the lineup. This is when Don Felder enters the picture.
Yes. They were working on a track called Good Day in Hell, and they felt it needed a really biting slide guitar part. They remembered Bernie Leiden's childhood friend, Don Felder.
And Frey had a nickname for him.
He did. They'd jammed with him backstage in Boston, and Glenn Frey had nicknamed him Fingers because his guitar playing was so proficient.
So they'd just call him up for a session.
Frey called Felder in January of 1974 just to add slide guitar to that one track. But the band was so blown away by what he added, by the sound and the energy, that they invited him to join the group the very next day. He became the 5th Eagle.
And the results were immediate. On the Border gave them their first #1 Billboard single, Best of My Love.
It did. And what's interesting is that Best of My Love is a ballad, but the album also had tracks like Already Gone, which is this up-tempo breakup song where Frey and Felder have this great guitar duet. It showed they could handle the rockier stuff just as well.
Around this time, April '74, they played the California Jam Festival, a massive show.
A truly massive gig. It was billed as the Woodstock of the West Coast, something like 300,000 fans.
But not everyone was there.
Right. Notably, Don Felder missed the show. He was called away for the birth of his son. Jackson Browne actually filled in for him on piano and acoustic guitar. But that event exposed the Eagles to a huge television audience, and it just elevated their profile even further.
So by 1975, with the release of one of these nights, the band basically transforms into international superstars. This is the first of 4 consecutive #1 albums for them.
One of these nights is where the polish really meets the power. The title track became their second chart topper. Glenn Frey called it his all-time favorite Eagles tune. Then you had Lion Eyes, which hit #2 and won them a Grammy for Best Pop Performance.
And we also have to talk about Take It to the Limit.
A crucial track. It was written by Meisner, Henley, and Frey, and it's the only Eagles single to feature Randy Meisner on lead vocals. It reached #4. But while the band is hitting this incredible commercial peak, the internal tension is just boiling over.
And this really marks the end of the road for one of the founding members, Bernie Leadon.
Leadon was becoming more and more disillusioned. He was the primary country and bluegrass influence in the band. As their sound moved decisively towards stadium rock, he felt he was losing creative control. And he was just unhappy with the relentless touring lifestyle.
There's a pretty famous story about his resignation, isn't there?
It's part of rock and roll folklore. One night, Glenn Frey was talking very animatedly about the future direction of the band, and Leadon, who was just completely fed up, poured a beer over Glenn Frey's head and told him he needed to chill out.
And that was that.
Pretty much. In December of 1975, Leadon resigned from the band.
It's interesting to note that before he left on that album, he wrote an instrumental called Journey of the Sorcerer, which later became the theme music for The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
A fascinating little footnote to his career. But his departure, it really signaled the definitive end of the early Eagles country era. They were a rock band now.
To replace him, they bring in Joe Walsh. And this seems like a really counterintuitive move at the time. I mean, Walsh was already a solo star, and he had a certain reputation.
He did. He was managed by Irving Azoff, who also managed the Eagles, which helped. But Joe Walsh was considered a wild card. There was genuine concern, especially from Don Henley, that Walsh might be too unpredictable, too chaotic for the disciplined machine the Eagles were becoming.
But his sound was exactly what they were moving towards.
Exactly. His arrival absolutely cemented that move to a more complex, guitar-heavy, arena rock sound.
Before they released their next studio album, though, they put out a compilation in early 1976, their greatest hits, 1971, 1975. And the statistics on this album are just, they're staggering.
They're almost unbelievable. It was
Right.
the best-selling album of the 20th century in the United States. It has sold 40 million copies in the U.S. alone. For years, it battled back and forth with Michael Jackson's Thriller for the all-time top spot. It was a phenomenon. And it primed the public perfectly for what was coming next.
Hotel California, released in late 1976. This is the band's signature album, their masterpiece.
It is the absolute cultural zenith of the band. It's a sprawling, ambitious record. It took them 18 months to make, which was a very long time back then. And the title track, Hotel California, is just a masterpiece of songwriting and production. The music was written by Don Felder, with the lyrics handled by Henley and Frey.
We have to touch on the meaning of that song. Over the years, people have projected everything onto it, from, Satanism to it being about purgatory.
The band has always been very clear about this. It is not about Satanism. Don Henley has described it as a song about the dark underbelly of the American dream. It's about excess in America, a commentary on the hedonism and the trap of the lifestyle they were all living in Los Angeles.
There's also some specific drama on this album, a story behind the song Victim of Love.
Yes, and this is a prime example of the internal politics at play. Don Felder wrote the music for Victim of Love, and he was promised the lead vocal. That was the deal.
That's not what happened.
No. The rest of the band, particularly Henley and Frey, felt his vocal performance just wasn't up to their standard. So, manager Irving Azoff took Felder out to dinner, essentially to get him out of the studio, and while they were gone, Don Henley went in and recorded the lead vocals himself.
That is just unbelievably ruthless.
It is. And if you look at the vinyl etching on side 2 of the original record, there's a little message there. It says, VOL is 5-piece live. That refers to the instrumental track being recorded live in the studio by all 5 members. But that vocal replacement, it was a sore point for Felder for decades.
The tour for Hotel California was massive, and the strain from it ended up claiming another member. Randy Meisner leaves in 1977.
Meisner was really suffering. He had stomach ulcers. He was exhausted from the road. The breaking point became known as the Knoxville incident. It was June 1977. Meisner was sick with the flu, and he was really nervous about being able to hit the high notes and take it to the limit, so he refused to perform the encore.
And Glenn Frey did not take that well at all.
No. They got into a physical confrontation backstage, a screaming match that turned into a fight. After that, Meisner was effectively frozen out. He left the band at the end of the tour.
And he was replaced by Timothy B. Schmidt, who, in a strange twist of fate, had also replaced Meisner years earlier in the band Poco.
An incredible coincidence, yes.
So now we have the lineup of Henley, Frey, Walsh, Felder, and Schmidt. They go into the studio to record The Long Run. This was supposed to be a double album, wasn't it?
That was the original intention, yes. But the well was starting to run dry. They just couldn't write enough songs they felt were good enough. The pressure was immense. It took them 18 months to make what became a single album.
And it was still a success.
Oh, commercially, it was a huge success.
Yeah.
It was released in 1979, went to #1. It had hits like Heartache Tonight, which won a Grammy, and Schmidt's debut vocal on I Can't Tell You Why. But the critics were less impressed. And behind the scenes, the band was completely fracturing.
And that fracture became a complete public break on July 31st, 1980, the infamous Long Night at Wrong Beach.
This is one of the most famous on-stage meltdowns in rock history. They were playing a benefit concert for Senator Alan Cranston in Long Beach, California. Before the show, Don Felder met Cranston's wife. And when thanked for playing, he said something like, "You're welcome, I guess."
And Frey took offense to that.
Glenn Frey took deep offense. He saw it as Felder being disrespectful to the cause, to the senator, and this animosity just boiled over onto the stage.
And it played out during the concert itself.
It did. The microphones between songs picked up their dialogue. Frey and Felder were openly threatening to beat each other up after the show. Frey told Felder, "Only 3 more songs until I kick your ass, pal."
Unbelievable.
They finished the set, apparently smashed some guitars backstage, and that was it. That was effectively the end of the Eagles.
Except they still owed their record label Elektra a live album. So Eagles Live comes out in 1980.
And the band was already broken up when they were mixing it. Frey was in Los Angeles. The other members were in Miami. Producer Bill Simsick has this famous quote where he said, "We were fixing 3-part harmonies courtesy of Federal Express."
They were shipping tapes back and forth because they refused to be in the same room.
Exactly. The liner notes of the album told the whole story. They listed 5 different attorneys, and the final line simply said, "Thank you and good night."
So we enter what Glenn Frey would later call the 14-year vacation. From 1980 to 1994, the Eagles simply did not exist. But the individual members were all very busy.
They were. Don Henley had a massive solo career. I mean, huge hits like Dirty Laundry, The Boys of Summer, The End of the Innocents. He was a major star in the 80s.
Glenn Frey also had huge success, especially with his soundtrack work. The Heat Is On from Beverly Hills Cop. You Belong to the City from Miami Vice.
Right, and he even did some acting on Miami Vice and other shows. He was very visible.
And Joe Walsh and Timothy B. Schmidt, they stayed active too.
Walsh released albums like There Goes the Neighborhood, but, he struggled a bit more commercially in the 80s than he had in the 70s. Schmidt was constantly working, touring with Jimmy Buffett, doing a lot of session work, singing backing vocals for bands like Toto and Crosby, Stills and Nash.
So what was it that actually broke the ice for the reunion? It wasn't a business meeting, was it? It was a music video.
That's right. In 1993, there was a country tribute album called Common Thread, The Songs of the Eagles. The country star Travis Tritt recorded a cover of Take It Easy, and he insisted that the long-run era lineup, Frey, Henley, Walsh, Felder, and Schmidt, appear in his music video for the song.
And they actually agreed to it.
They agreed. And being on that set together, playing pool, just hanging out, it thawed the relations just enough to start a conversation.
And in April 1994, they announced the reunion. Glenn Frey opens their first show back with that iconic line.
"For the record, we never broke up, we just took a 14-year vacation." It was a brilliant piece of branding. It reframed the whole narrative.
And the album that came from it, Hell Freezes Over, was huge.
It was a monster success. A mix of live tracks from their MTV special and 4 new studio songs like Get Over It and Love Will Keep Us Alive. It debuted at #1, and the tour was one of the highest grossing of the decade.
In 1998, they're inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And for that one night, they managed to put the past aside.
They did. All 7 members, current and former, performed together on stage. You had Frey, Henley, Felder, Walsh, and Schmidt, plus Bernie Ledden and Randy Meisner. They played Take It Easy in Hotel California together. It was a real moment of, well, temporary unity.
Temporary being the key word, because unity is rarely permanent with this group. We move into the new millennium and the conflict flares up again. Don Felder played his last show with the band on New Year's Eve, 1999.
And this leads to the next major and very public chapter, the lawsuit. In February 2001, Don Felder was officially fired from the band. He immediately filed a suit alleging wrongful termination and breach of contract.
What was the core of that dispute?
It really came down to money. Felder claimed that the original agreement when they reunited was a 5-way equal partnership, an equal split of the profits. He alleged that Henley and Frey had restructured the business entities to give themselves a higher percentage of the profits, starting with the Hell Freezes Over tour.
And Henley and Frey countersued.
They did. They countersued Felder over material in his upcoming tell-all book, which was titled Heaven and Hell. They battled legally for years. It was finally settled out of court in 2007 for an amount that has never been disclosed.
During all of this, the band just kept on touring, with guitarist Stuart Smith essentially taking over Felder's musical role, though as a hired gun, not a full member. And in 2007, they finally released a new studio album, Long Road Out of Eden.
This was a huge deal. Their first album of all new material since 1979. And their distribution strategy was very forward-thinking for the time. It was released exclusively through the band's website and in the U.S. through Walmart and Sam's Club.
And it was a hit.
Debuted at #1. It even included the song How Long, which was actually a J.D. Souther song the band used to perform in the 70s, but had never officially recorded. It won them another Grammy.
They toured extensively on that album. Then in 2013, they put out the big documentary, History of the Eagles.
That documentary was really significant. It allowed them to frame their own narrative, to tell their story their way, and they launched a massive tour to support it.
And that tour had a surprise guest.
It did. Bernie Ledden returned as a guest for that tour, which was a nice full-circle moment. Felder, of course, was not part of it due to the legal history, and Randy Meisner couldn't participate due to his declining health.
And then we reach a truly tragic turning point, January 18th, 2016, the death of Glenn Frey.
It was a complete shock to the music world. He died from complications of rheumatoid arthritis, acute ulcerative colitis, and pneumonia. The impact was immediate. Don Henley stated very publicly that he didn't think the band would or could perform again.
But as we now know, they did continue. In 2017, a completely new era for the band began.
They defied what seemed like a definitive end. They agreed to play the Classic West and Classic East festival concerts in the summer of 2017. And to fill Glenn's monumental role, they brought in 2 people.
Deacon Frey, Glenn's son, and Vince Gill, the country superstar.
It was a fascinating choice. Deacon represented the bloodline, the legacy, and Vince Gill provided the incredible vocal prowess and the guitar skill needed to pull off those songs. And surprisingly, it worked.
They kept touring. In 2019, they did those special Hotel California concerts in Las Vegas, playing the album in its entirety.
Yes, with a full orchestra and choir, a huge production. Then in 2022, Deacon Frey left for a bit to pursue a solo career, but he returned as a guest in 2023. And in July of that year, the band announced The Long Goodbye, what they billed as their official farewell tour.
And very sadly, that same month, July 2023, Randy Meisner passed away from complications of COPD.
Another one of the original voices silenced, a huge loss.
Which brings us pretty much up to date. From late 2024 through early 2026, the band has been in residency at the Sphere in Las Vegas.
That's right. The residency began in September 2024, and it's scheduled to continue into March 2026. There was another lineup change in 2025 when their longtime touring guitarist Stuart Smith had to retire due to Parkinson's disease. He was replaced by Chris Holt.
So as of now, the band is still active with a core of Henley, Walsh, and Schmidt, joined by Vince Gill and Deacon Frey. It's an incredible story of persistence.
It is. When you step back and look at the whole journey, it's just remarkable. From backing Linda Ronstadt to becoming this massive corporate rock entity, surviving these brutal breakups, the lawsuits, and even the death of a founder.
Their standing in music history is just undeniable. The sales figures, the longevity, it all speaks for itself.
It really makes you think about the nature of a band. Is it a brotherhood or is it a brand? And somehow the Eagles managed to become an institution, a brand that could transcend its individual members, even its founders. it continues on.
A fascinating final thought. Thank you for breaking all of this down for us.
You're very welcome.
And to everyone with us, thanks for listening.